Hi, everyone, and welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, the Senior News Editor for Job Searches and Careers at LinkedIn News. Thank you, as always, for joining us on this Friday. We have a wonderful conversation today, but I want to start off, as I always do, by asking you to introduce yourself in the comments. I already see a lot of you doing so I think I see Alexandra from Ontario, Antoine from Toronto, and Patsy from Pennsylvania, which is my home state in the United States. So thank you all again for introducing yourself. Keep telling us a little bit about yourself and tell us about your job search. Maybe you're looking to move to a new area of the country, a new area of the world, or break into a new field. There's a lot of companies and industries that are looking to bring on new talent now that vaccines are starting to roll out in many countries. So tell us a little bit about your job search, and then what I want you to do is connect with each other. Maybe you see someone who works in the industry that you want to work in. Maybe you see someone who works in an area of the country where you want to move to. Connect with each other, and some of the best conversations that I hear from after the show is from people who end up job searching together or helping each other out with their job search. Networking is so important and a cornerstone of a successful job search, and there's no better time to start than right now. And we have so many people joining us from all around the world. We have Lisa from North Carolina, Kyle from Houston, Jill from Florida, Morgan from South Carolina, Cindy from Chicago. So welcome to all of you. And I see some people in the comments also from India. I hope you're all staying safe. I know you have a very difficult situation there and also in Brazil. So please stay safe. It's obviously so important to take care of yourself to able to get a job. So please take care of yourself. And today we're going to be talking all about job interviews, and we're also going to be answering your questions about job searching at the end of the broadcast. So be sure to get your questions in to the comments. We'll be taking those in just a bit. But first, I want to welcome and introduce our guest, Shelley Piedmont, who is a career coach. Thank you so much for joining us, Shelley.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Definitely. And, I think it's so wonderful to have you here because you're obviously a career coach, but you've also been on the recruiting side of companies. So you've seen both sides and you know how companies work. So it's really such a valuable treat to have you here to tell us all about job searching. And before the show, we were talking about what we wanted to talk about and tell people about. And you mentioned job interviews, which is such a crucial part of the hiring process. So can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important for people to focus on preparing for job interviews?
Sure. So just imagine you go to a play and you're sitting in the audience and the play starts, and what you see is not what you expect. You see actors that maybe don't know their lines, or they don't know where to place their bodies. It just seems like it's not connected, and there's a lack of confidence in the ensemble. So as a person who's in the audience, you probably are a bit confused and maybe disappointed. So that's often how an interviewer feels when someone comes to an interview and is really not prepared. Oftentimes they don't have good answers or complete answers, or they just are not feeling very comfortable in the conversation. And even if the expectation was they would do well because they're very well qualified, they don't perform very well. And there's a lot of competition out there. So those that actually prepare for an interview, put the effort in, will usually do better, and as a result, get the offer.
I'm sure. And, as someone who was on the recruiting side of the process, I'm assuming it's really easy to tell who did and did not prepare for a job interview, right?
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. I've done thousands of interviews, and usually within the first 5 minutes, you can really tell who has prepared well for that interaction you're having with them.
Got it. And and we have so many people joining us today, and I'm assuming they all want to get to the job interview portion of the hiring process. And, we have Nick from Indiana, William from Virginia, Diane from Louisiana, Jen from New York City, where I am right now, Kimberly from California, Lydia from Maryland, Joe from Missouri, and Julie from Wisconsin, just some of the people who are joining us. So, get your questions in about job searching or job interview. We'll get to them in just a bit. But Shelley, can you tell us a little bit about how people should prepare for an interview? Because I think a lot of people, they don't even know where to begin when you say, hey, prepare for a job interview. And they say, well, how do I do that?
No, it's a very good question. And there's quite a few things that you can do. First off, you need to figure out what that particular employer or hiring manager is looking for. That's really important because at the end of the day, the interview, though it's about you, it's not necessarily about what you want to say. It's really about what the interviewer needs to hear. And what they need to hear is that you are the answer to their problems. And how you do that is you show value to them, that you would be able to do the job and do it well because you have certain skills, experiences, etc. So what you do first is you go through the job posting. And I love to just take a highlighter and look at the words that jump out to you about experience. Maybe they're looking for variance analysis, or maybe they're looking for technical skills like SQL, or maybe they're looking for soft skills like problem solving or collaboration. Look at those words and then start writing them down. We're going to come back to that, but that's going to be how you start preparing. The second thing you want to do is just general research, and that's going to be a little more than just going to the website. That's good, but you also want to look on the internet. What is being said about the company? What's happening in the industry? What's going on with competition? Look on the socials and see what is being said about that particular company. Go to places like Reddit or Quora to look at what's being said. That will give you some information as well to know what is happening currently within that company. That also will help you key on what they will value. Lastly, look at your network. Who's worked at that company? Who is currently working there? Who are people you know in your network that maybe are clients or suppliers? They may have additional information as well. They may know about the culture of the company, what's going on internally, tell you about what they've liked about that company, what they didn't like about that company. But this is all great information for you then to figure out, okay, what value can I offer to this company that they really want? Second thing you do is once you gather all that information is you're going to start making stories around those particular skills or experiences. Stories are really powerful, and people, they want facts and figures, but at the end of the day, you will be memorable by the stories you tell that explain your accomplishments in these areas. So start with writing down stories. It's best if you can get at least 2 for each of those skills or experiences, whatever it might be. And you want to have a complete story. So when I say complete, it should have a beginning, middle, and end. Beginning is really what the situation you were in. The middle is what were you asked to do? What did you actually accomplish? The last part will be your results. How did it impact the business? And if you have any learnings from that, that's even better to talk about. So you want to start gathering those stories. Next thing you want to do is practice them. It's really important to practice so you feel very comfortable and confident in what you're going to say. So if you have somebody in your network that has hiring experience and they will help you, that is ideal because they can, based on their experience of hiring, tell you ways that you can improve, which is always helpful because as we know, it's always tough to get feedback in interviews. So that's a great way to get feedback before you actually go into the interview. I would also make sure that you are videoing yourself. For many of us, it will be video interviews, so you really need to be comfortable how you appear on video. You have the bright lighting, that you have good sound, that you're making good eye contact, and that you make sense and your stories are well crafted. So you want to practice that. You can even send a copy of that video to friends or colleagues, anyone that you know that will give you good, honest feedback. That's important. The other thing I would say is make sure that you are researching not only the company, but the people that are going to interview you. Find out about their background, their experience. LinkedIn is a great place to do that because you can see where the person's worked before, how long they've been with the company, their education, maybe their volunteer work. And what you want to do in the interview is definitely build rapport. Because remember that interviewer is looking not only whether you can do the job, but are you a person that they would want to work with? Remember, you're going to be with this team, working with them for many hours in the week. And so they want to make sure that, that you would be someone that they would love to have a conversation with, either about work or not work. So you want to build that rapport, and having information about the interviewer helps that because you can use that as an icebreaker. Even at the end of the interview, you can talk about interests. And when you are interested in another person, they tend to be interested in you. And then the last thing I would say is make sure that you have a needs, wants, and wishes list. That's really important for fit. You want to make sure that you absolutely know what is important for the next job that you have so that you can find the right fit. So your needs can be anything from compensation, benefits, it could be work flexibility, it could be the content of the job, making sure it's things that you want to do. It could be that experience you'll have with the manager. You might want to avoid a micromanager, for example. That's important. It could be the team and how the team is composed and how they interact with each other. And it could be culture. Maybe you want a company that is very entrepreneurial, or you might want a company that has a mission that you believe in. These are important to write down, and then come up with questions that you can ask, that you can get responses that will be able to help you judge whether this company, this hiring manager has what you need. Remember, it's a two-way conversation. So as they are asking you for information, you want to make sure that you are doing the same to find the right fit. So I think if you do all these things, you will be very well prepared for your interviews.
I think that's all great advice, and especially the last point where it's a two-way conversation. The reason you accept a job at the end is because you get to decide whether you want to continue on with that relationship. So be sure you're asking questions. And then also going back to your first point about doing the research, I think that is also so important because I think a lot of people, they don't try and talk to people inside a company, and you really get sort of secrets or tricks of the trade where they'll give you a tip that says, listen, in those interviews, they're going to be talking about how excited you are about the job. So act excited, show how excited you are. You get like the inside scoop almost about what the company cares about. So I think those are all really good pieces of advice. And we have so many people joining us. I think they got a lot out of it. We have Maxine from Brooklyn, Mary from Buffalo, Caroline from Portugal, Austin from Wisconsin, Janie from Italy, James from Arizona, and Amit from India. So we get a lot of people here listening about job interviews. And we have a follow-up here from William, and I think this is very appropriate for the Zoom internet age. And he wants to know how to dress for a Zoom interview. What would your suggestion be for that, Shelley? Because there's a lot of people who, they don't know, maybe they should wear a suit, maybe they should dress down a little bit. What's your suggestion for a Zoom interview dress situation?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think the guidance for a Zoom interview would be the same as if you were doing an in-person interview. You should treat them really the same. So my guidance has always been take a look at what people are wearing. And oftentimes you can do that by looking at the website. They often have pictures. And you kind of get a sense of what the work wardrobe is. And then I would always step it up a little bit. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to wear a suit, but I would look at what is the norm for the people and then make it just a little bit nicer. You want to always look very professional, like you've taken this interview very seriously and that you want to show off the best you there.
Yeah, I think that is a really good piece of advice. And there's a lot of pictures online usually about what the work environments look like. And, especially if, they're just interviewing as part of your day, they're probably not going to be changing into a 3-piece suit or something just to interview you. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. And we have a lot of questions coming in about salary. And one of them is basically, how do you discuss salary and how do you encounter that situation? Because some people, they reach the question on an application. Sometimes they try to avoid it as long as possible. What is your recommendation for people when they are trying to discuss salary?
Yeah, it's one of the trickier parts of the interview process. And, what I tell people is understand why the employer's asking for it. Usually it's because they want to make sure that you both are in the same neighborhood in terms of what the expectations are. Recruiter looks very bad when they take somebody through the process, they get to the hiring manager, maybe the hiring manager wants to make the hire, but we haven't talked about salary, and so we don't know what the expectations, and then we find out that you're very far apart. So that has then been a waste of your time as the candidate because you can't get to an agreement. It also is a waste of time for the hiring manager. So we always try to avoid that. So you're going to be asked about that. You can, 100% plan on that. So what do you try to do? Well, you want to know what the salary range is. That's really your goal. So what you can try to do is certainly when you get a phone screen and you get that question, is really turn it around and say, hey, I'm sure that you have a range for this position already. Would you be okay to share that with me? I'd be really interested to knowing that, or something of that nature, and see what they say. Some recruiters are happy to give the range. They don't have any problems, but some will push back because traditionally the first one that gives a number is at a disadvantage. So they may push back to you and say, I really need to know what you want. And so you have to kind of play it by ear of how much you want to go back and forth about it. But, if they're very insistent about it, the best thing then you can do is provide not a dollar amount or whatever currency, but I would do a range. And that's where you do your research ahead of time to know what is your level of experience and that type of role worth in the marketplace. So you have a good idea of what to expect. And then you can tell a range that is acceptable for you. You probably are not going to talk about your minimum, the least amount you'll take, but give them an idea of really what is acceptable for you and up to your high end, what you would really like, and see what they have to say. Sometimes if you are too high, then the recruiter might mention that to you and say you really are out of the range, and then provide some more information about the range. And then it will be up to you to decide whether that particular position will be of interest.
Yeah, and we actually have a question here from Sharon, and I'd be interested to hear maybe what you're hearing from your clients and what you're seeing in the market. And she says basically, I see a lot of jobs available, but I feel like employers are offering lower salaries than pre-COVID. Do job hunters need to be prepared to accept lower compensation? What do you think is happening in the market?
I think in the market, it's all over, and it's a really good question, Sharon. It depends on what you're doing, the industry. I think it's always dependent upon what the salaries look like. So if you're in a high demand area, then the salaries are probably going up. If you're in a low demand, yes, it's possible that you may find that the salaries are less than what you would have anticipated prior to COVID. I know that from talking to people that they actually experienced as they were making or they were getting offers that they thought were far less than what the market had been just a year ago. So it does change. That it's very dynamic, the market. So that's where using the salary information like a pay scale or salary.com is helpful, because they should be updating those to give you some more real-time numbers so you know what to expect in the market.
Definitely. And, a question that we got too is one from Beverly. And this has to deal with initial conversations with a company. And she wants to know, how do you find out who the hiring manager is so that you can address cover letters to that person? What's your recommendation about reaching out? Should you go for the hiring manager? Should you go for the recruiter? Is there a middle ground? How should they do that dance?
Well, there's probably no exact right answer to that. It can be a little bit easier if you especially can use LinkedIn and the department and then about the title of the person. That might be helpful for you to figure out who the hiring manager is. One of the things that I've always thought was helpful is you can actually pick up the phone and call. And oftentimes the receptionist or whoever answers the phone may have this information for you. They may know, or they may know who to connect you with who would have that information. So those are all different options in terms of trying to find the right name, especially if you want to personalize your cover letter. That always makes sense. And it's always better if you can put a name in there, whether it is the recruiter or whether it is the hiring manager.
Yeah. And I know I've been in that position before where I've been emailing around and said, hey, do you know the name of the hiring manager, or do you know the recruiter who's assigned to this posting? And you'll be surprised that a lot of people will volunteer that information, especially if you're not asking for a connection, you're just asking for their name. So right. It is usually okay to ask. And we have a question here from Kevin that just came in, and I think it's really good. How do you make yourself stand out from someone else applying for a job if you are younger and possibly less experienced than other candidates? And I think there's a lot of people in this boat where, maybe they graduated in the last few years. The job market has been rocky, obviously, because of the pandemic. How do you suggest people stand out, especially if they're younger or just new to the job market?
Well, I think it is important to stand out. You really want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward, right? So one of the ways to help stand out is with your resume and making sure that you're tailoring your resume for the job, whatever that job is. So again, going through that job posting, understanding what is important to that particular employer, and making sure in your resume that you are addressing those things. As long as you have them, and you can put them on there, yes, make sure that you're talking about all the skills that you'll bring, all the accomplishments that you've had thus far. And, you might have to go back to times when you were in school, or that maybe your volunteer work to help with that. But The hiring managers are looking for, again, value. What value do you bring? And if you can address that in your resume, that's really helpful. The second thing I would say is network. Even if you do not have a lot of experience, when you're looking for a job, networking can really be helpful. Having conversations with people at that organization, people will get to know you and they can put in a good word for you. That really helps you stand out from everybody else who may have just applied on a job board. So don't neglect networking. Even if you don't seem to have as much experience, you may be the right person for the job, and others might see that through the conversations that you have. So please try that. I think that might be helpful.
I think that's such a good point, is networking is often sort of the magic solution for a lot of problems in job searching, is because you get to overcome some of the impersonality part of the hiring process. I don't know if that's a word or a term, but you get over that little threshold and you get to wow them with your personality and you get to wow them with your knowledge. And what's really great is when you're maybe don't have the experience on your resume, they don't necessarily expect a ton out of you. So you get to wow them and basically overperform when they might be thinking that you're not going to bring that much to the table. I always tell, especially young people, that they're going to underestimate you. So it's your chance to really, hit the gas pedal and go for the gold. So I think that's really great advice. And we have a lot of questions coming in. And one that I thought was really interesting is from Maria. And she says, I have 2 job offers now. One is temporary, but I feel more passionate about it. And the other is permanent, but the company does not have good reviews from former employees. What should I consider in this situation?
Well, that's a very good question. And well, it's always better to have more opportunities than less. It still can be a problem. What I would do is go back to what I had talked about before, was really knowing what you want out of a job and having very clear idea of what your needs are, your wishes are, your wants are. So I would go back to the needs list that you have and look at the 2 jobs and compare. So you said that, you're a little bit more passionate about the one job. Well, try to figure out, what does that mean and how does that really match to your needs list? And because that's a good indicator whether a job might be the right one for you, if it really kind of ticks off all the things that you're looking for. As to the other part where you're saying the permanent job, but this is a job where you're having some concerns about some reviews, you have to kind of dig in there, is what I would tell you. People that put reviews on those sites, it usually is the people that have issues at that company, and you never know what the backstory is. So obviously, if you see a themes there, that should be a point of concern. Don't ignore that. But if it's one individual review, you might want to take that with a grain of salt. The other thing is, if you're starting to see themes, try to talk to people that have worked there or know what that organization is like, to see if they confirm what you're seeing. The worst thing is to get into a position and really find that it's not the right fit. You usually will know that fairly quickly, and then you have to make a decision. Are you going to tough it out, think things will go better, or are you going to try to then get back in the job market? So, obviously no one really wants to quickly get into a job and then start their job search again. So think hard and be very clear what you need, and then probably the answer will present itself to you.
I think those are all really good points, especially the idea that you have to think about who is behind the comments that you're seeing online, because people are typically driven to complain more than praise online. So it's always difficult when you're reading it. Well, what is the backstory here? How many people actually had a good relationship with the company? So you don't know really that dynamic. And
Right.
especially when you talked about the idea of, is it the right job? I know the next edition of my newsletter, Get Hired, is going to focus on the idea of like a perfect job, which doesn't really exist. And I think Maria's question is a good example of that. There's pluses and minuses in both columns. So you have to find the right job, not necessarily the perfect one.
Right.
And we have another question here, which is sort of the flip side of standing out as a younger person with less experience. This is from Timothy, and he says, what if you're older? How do you make the hiring manager see that you still have value to add? And I see some people in the comments basically saying, I'm encountering the same situation. I'm finding jobs that don't really pay much. So what's your advice for older job seekers?
Well, that's a tough one too. We don't like to talk about ageism, but it does happen, certainly, and it's something that older workers have to contend with. But the question is, how do you show your value is a good one. And I think it doesn't matter if you're in your 50s, 60s, or 20s. Everybody needs to show their value. So part of that is going back to what I said before, figure out what is it that this company needs. And, doing that research, then you can figure out better how to show the value. So going through your career, what are the experiences that you've had that could potentially really be good for this particular employer and their current situation? And you need to be very good about explaining that, especially on your documents that you're using for marketing. That would be obviously your resume or CV, and generally your LinkedIn profile. So you really need to think about what you've done, and experience is not all of it. Experience can be good, but hiring managers are going to want to know more. Just because you did something doesn't necessarily mean you did it well or you accomplished much. So they're really more interested in what was the results of what you did. How did that impact business positively? And then I think concentrate on that. That's important. I think the other thing, as I mentioned before, is networking. Networking is great because you have conversations. You end up being more than your resume or more than your LinkedIn profile. And it's really wonderful when you can have those conversations and talk about some of the things that you've done and kind of connect the dots for people in the organization or for people that can help you potentially uncover opportunities. So don't discount that at all. That's like other ways that you can show your value as well.
Yes, and I think the idea about, how do you communicate that experience to a company and a hiring manager and a recruiter is so important, because especially as people get older, and I put myself in this camp now that I've been in the workforce for over a decade, I get into the mindset of, well, I've done X, Y, and Z, therefore I deserve this job. But in reality, employers are inherently selfish and self-centered. So they don't care about what you did really in the past. They need to know how you're going to use that to help them now. So it's always about, a selfish employer wanting to know, well, okay, what are you going to do for me? So I think that's such an important point. And, to bring back the conversation to interviews, I think we have a great question to end on from Debbie, which is, what if the interview goes well, but then you don't hear back after 2 tries via email about the hiring process? And this is typically called ghosting, where people do an interview and all of a sudden they just don't hear back even when they follow up. What's your advice for people after interviews, or if they're experiencing ghosting?
Yes, it's really a problem. As a recruiter, I wouldn't ghost people because, first of all, it's just rude. And somebody came to, my employer, or I talked with them over the phone, I needed to provide something back to them to let them know that, they didn't get the job or there was a holdup, something going on. So I really dislike this. But I know that many people in the job market do experience this. You're doing the right thing by following up. And, I would continue to follow up to a certain point. If you've tried 2 times, maybe you can try another time. If you're going through the talent acquisition or HR department, you might try going to the hiring manager or anybody that you interviewed with outside of that group to get their attention that you haven't heard anything back. Sometimes that can help because that hiring manager usually doesn't want to have any candidates have a bad experience. So they may get back to the talent acquisition team and tell them, you need to get back to this individual. And there might be many reasons why you don't hear back. It can be that they just don't have any information. So many things happen behind the scenes and things change. People go on vacation, there's reorgs, things like that. So it isn't necessarily a bad thing or a bad sign that you haven't heard anything back. They just may not know exactly what they're going to do. But I would be persistent, but you'll get to a point where you've tried multiple times and if you don't hear anything, please move on. That tells you a lot about that employer, honestly, and you might be better off not wanting to work there at all.
Yeah. And also what I think is always important is that don't burn your bridges. Even here at LinkedIn, I remember when I interviewed for this job, I remember I didn't hear anything for a little while and I followed up, but it turned out the person was away. So when they got back, they're, oh, sorry, we were away, but, do you want to come in for the second round of interviews? So never burn your bridges because you don't know exactly what's happening behind the scenes. And who knows, you might get the call back and end up here. So it's always a good idea. And thank you so much, Shelley, for all that wonderful information. I think our members got so much out of it.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for having me today. And thank you, everyone, for joining. It was my pleasure to help.
Yeah, and I hope everyone was watching at the bottom of the screen because we've been showing your LinkedIn profile. So I hope people are following. You always post such great content.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And thank you for joining us out there. I know a lot of you got so much out of this conversation, and I hope you'll come back, to the show. And obviously, we have such great programming on the LinkedIn news page. And on Monday is no exception. My colleague, Nina Melendez, will be hosting a pitch off on LinkedIn News Live on Monday. She'll be bringing on 4 brave participants to give communications expert Pete Makaitis their elevator pitch. He'll be giving live feedback on how to do better in interviews and networking events, something that's very useful when job searching. That's on Monday at noon on the LinkedIn news page. So I just want to remind you, too, that I am here every Friday hosting Get Hired Live. And next week, we're going to have Jennifer Tardy here. She is the CEO of Jennifer Tardy Consulting, and we're going to be talking about job seeking as a member of an underrepresented group. I know there's a lot of anxiety that's tied to people who wonder maybe if they experience bias in the hiring process. We're going to be separating some fact from fiction, so be sure to tune into that. You'll be seeing a link in just a little bit, so be sure to tune in for that. And as always, I hope that you are staying safe and following your local guidelines. Like I said, I know there are parts of the world where the virus and things are getting better, but there are other parts that are having a very difficult time right now, like in India and Brazil. So please take time to take care of yourself. Make sure that you're following all the local health guidelines, because you could only get hired, you could only be a good candidate if you're well enough to do so. So be sure to be taking care of yourself. And then until next time, best of luck.